All right, diving in today with something you guys sent over, and wow, this Woody Harrelson interview with Joe Rogan, it is a long one.
Oh,
So
yeah,
we're
yeah.
gonna kind of surface some of the key points and see what we can uncover here.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because while they touch on a lot of different things, there does seem to be this recurring theme of power dynamics, like those who have power, whether that's corporations, governments, media, how they kind of wield that influence and how that impacts all of us.
Yeah, and really looking at, are those decisions driven by profit, or are they driven with people in mind? And I think that's kind of the question that underlies a lot of this conversation. And they really go in on big pharma, government agencies, all that stuff. But right out of the gate, Woody is not shy about his feelings on the COVID-19 vaccine mandates.
No, not at all.
He uses the word fascistic even.
He does. Very strong opinions there, for
Hmm.
sure. But it does beyond just like personal opinion, too. Like they really get into the legal framework around vaccines.
Yeah, they point to a 1986 law which basically shields vaccine manufacturers from liability. So if you think you've been injured or harmed by a vaccine, there's very little legal recourse for that.
Right, and this leads them to talk about VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, which is this government website where anybody can report, potential side effects. But what Woody and Joe find interesting is that it's all self-reported. So it raises the question, are we just seeing the tip of the iceberg here?
Yeah, it makes you wonder how complete is that data, and the skepticism doesn't stop there. They even question the accuracy of the PCR tests, the narrative around how effective vaccines are at preventing transmission.
Like really encouraging us to look beyond, what we're being told and to ask those tougher questions, which kind of brings us to their critique of the media, specifically what they see as this bias towards a pro-vaccine stance.
They don't hold back. They call out specifically CNN, MSNBC, Rolling Stone for their coverage of ivermectin as a potential COVID treatment.
And it's not even that they disagree with the coverage so much as what they see as like misrepresentation and failures to fact check certain claims. They point to instances where information that challenges the prevailing narrative was very quickly dismissed or labeled as misinformation.
Right, and they tie this into the Trusted News Initiative, which, on the surface sounds pretty benign. It's a collaboration between major media organizations to combat misinformation, which sounds like a good thing, right? But Woody and Joe suggest that it might have actually had the opposite effect and stifled open discussion.
Exactly. The idea that, while the goal might have been to stop the spread of harmful falsehoods, the result was that dissenting voices, even those raising legitimate concerns, were often silenced or marginalized. It raises a really important question. Can you fight misinformation by limiting the free flow of information?
It's a tough one, for sure, and this distrust of powerful institutions pushing a narrative kind of carries over into another topic that they get into, which is war and the military-industrial complex.
It's fascinating how they connect these dots between these seemingly disparate topics, like, hey, maybe it's not just about vaccines and media. Maybe there's a bigger pattern here of profit motives driving decisions that impact millions of people.
Yeah, and they use historical examples to kind of illustrate their point. They bring up the Vietnam War, the Iran-Contra affair, and suggest that there were powerful figures who actually profited from prolonging these conflicts. It really makes you think about who benefits from war and at what cost.
Right, and they bring it right up to the present day, talking about Afghanistan, specifically its role in opium production and how that might have played into the decision-making around the conflict. They suggest that their potential for continued profit in Afghanistan beyond whatever stated objectives were, might have actually been a factor in the decisions made by those in power.
It's a sobering thought that even in matters of war and peace, profit could be playing a part. And this theme kind of continues as they shift gears a little bit and start talking about another system that they see as flawed and potentially profit-driven, which is the criminal justice system, specifically drug policy.
Both Woody and Joe are very, very vocal about legalizing marijuana. They argue that it just doesn't make sense to criminalize a plant with a relatively safe track record, especially when you look at all the evidence pointing to, the benefits of cannabis, both medicinally and recreationally.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't stop at marijuana. They go on to critique the whole system of private prisons where the profit motive can actually incentivize putting more people behind bars, especially for nonviolent drug offenses. defenses.
Yeah.
And this is where they make a pretty striking comparison. They bring up the Jim Crow era and how after slavery was abolished, laws were used to basically create a new system of forced labor that disproportionately impacted Black communities. And they argue that mass incarceration fueled by the profit motive of private prison is almost a modern-day echo of that same system.
Yeah, it's chilling to see those parallels, how these systems can be kind of manipulated for profit, even at the expense of, human well-being. But then they offer up a potential solution. And it's not what you might expect, psychedelics.
Yeah, they make a pretty compelling case for psychedelics as a tool for social change. Their argument is that these experiences can foster empathy and a sense of interconnectedness and potentially help break down the walls of division and greed that are driving so many of the problems they've been talking about.
Yeah, it's interesting how they connect the criminalization of psychedelics in the 1970s to a potential effort to suppress social movements and maintain the status quo. They suggest that, maybe those in power saw these substances as a threat, not just to public health, but to the established order.
Right. It makes you wonder, what if psychedelics hadn't been demonized and pushed underground? Could they have played a more positive role in shaping our society? And this leads them into a broader discussion about the nature of consciousness, questioning our understanding of reality and searching for truth.
Yeah, and Woody shares some of his personal views on religion here, expressing a preference for less rigid frameworks, that don't punish dissent. And both he and Joe seem to value personal experience and individual journeys of discovery over blindly accepting dogma.
They also touch upon the idea of consensual crimes, arguing that actions that don't harm others or their property shouldn't be considered criminal in the first place. And they see the war on drugs as a prime example of this, where individuals are punished for choices that don't directly infringe on the rights of others.
It's an interesting point. Where do we draw the line between individual freedom and societal control? And how much of that control is really about protecting people versus maintaining a certain power structure?
This leads them into a critique of mainstream media, but from a slightly different angle than before. This time they're talking about the influence of corporate interests on what gets reported and how it's framed.
Mm-hmm.
And they suggest that the focus on profit often leads to a bias towards sensationalism and conflict rather than nuanced, in-depth reporting.
Right.
They contrast this with the rise of independent journalists who often operate outside of those corporate structures and are more willing to challenge established narratives. They specifically mention Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi, Michael Schellenberger as examples, praising their willingness to tackle complex issues and expose corruption even when it's unpopular.
Yeah.
They circle back to the Trusted News Initiative, arguing that while well-intentioned, it may have inadvertently contributed to a culture of censorship, silencing important voices and limiting open debate.
Right.
And then they delve into the wild west of social media, acknowledging both the good and the bad. On the one hand, it connects us, it gives us access to information. But on the other hand, it can be addictive, it can be divisive, it can be a breeding ground for misinformation.
Yeah.
And they even share some personal strategies for navigating this digital landscape, emphasizing the importance of conscious consumption setting boundaries, being mindful of how much time they're spending online.
Right.
They talk about unplugging, being present in the real world and not letting the digital world consume them entirely.
It's a good reminder for all of us. It's so easy to get sucked into that vortex.
It is.
But you got to step back and make sure it's not controlling your life. And speaking of technology, they touch on something pretty mind-blowing, AI, particularly its potential to both illuminate and distort truth.
Mm-hmm.
They acknowledge the power of AI to analyze data, to make predictions, to even create art. But they also express concern about its potential for manipulation, especially in the wrong hands.
Right. And it's interesting how they tie this back into their earlier concerns about corporate power and government overreach. They're essentially saying that AI could amplify those existing threats if we're not careful.
Yeah, they even jokingly suggest that maybe everyone in positions of power should be required to have a psychedelic experience. Their point being that this could foster more empathy, compassion, and more ethical decision-making.
It's a humorous way of making a serious point.
Yeah.
They're highlighting the need for a more human-centered approach to technology, one that prioritizes well-being and ethical considerations over profit and power.
It seems like they're advocating for a shift in values, not just in the tech world, but in society as a whole.
Exactly. And this leads them into a discussion about personal well-being. but not in the typical, self-help way. They talk about exercise, diet, mindfulness, but it's all framed within this larger context of finding meaning and purpose in a world that often feels very superficial and materialistic.
Hmm.
They emphasize the importance of balance, self-care, and prioritizing inner peace over external achievements.
Yeah.
They advocate for a more mindful and intentional way of living, suggesting that true success isn't about accumulating wealth or status, but about cultivating inner fulfillment and living in alignment with your values.
Mm-hmm.
And they stress the power of gratitude. They talk about how simply taking the time to appreciate the good things in your life can have a profound impact on your overall well-being.
Right.
They also touch upon the importance of confronting your fears, challenging yourself, and stepping outside your comfort zone. They seem to believe that growth happens when you push past those self-imposed limits and embrace new experiences.
It's inspiring. They're essentially saying don't be afraid to take risks, to learn, to evolve, to become the best version of yourself. But it's not just about individual growth. They also highlight the importance of community and connection.
Right? They talk about the value of meaningful relationships, shared experiences, and how crucial it is to feel a sense of belonging. They seem to be advocating for a shift away from the hyper-individualism that often characterizes modern society, suggesting that our interconnectedness is fundamental to our well-being.
Yeah.
They even share personal anecdotes about the simple joys of spending time with loved ones, playing games, and just being present with each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful moments in life are the ones we often take for granted.
Yeah, it's like they're encouraging a shift in focus from a me mentality to a we mentality. And that sense of interconnectedness extends beyond just human relationships. They also talk about the importance of our connection to nature.
Oh, absolutely. They spend some time reflecting on the beauty and restorative power of the natural world, how spending time outdoors can ground us and help us find perspective.
Yeah, Woody shares some personal stories about his own experiences in nature, describing the awe and wonder it evokes. And it kind of ties back to their earlier discussion about regenerative farming and the need to live in harmony with the environment, not just exploit it for profit.
Right, like caring for the planet is an extension of caring for ourselves and each other.
Mm-hmm.
And this theme of interconnectedness continues as they discuss the importance of mentorship and learning from those who came before us.
Yeah, they talk about the value of finding role models who embody integrity, compassion, and wisdom, people who can inspire us to live more meaningful lives.
Mm-hmm. And they even share stories about individuals who've had a profound impact on their own journeys, emphasizing the power of mentorship to shape and guide us.
It's a reminder that we don't have to figure everything out on our own. There's wisdom to be gained from those who've walked the path before us, and they encourage us to keep learning, keep exploring, keep pushing our boundaries.
Yeah. They seem to believe that growth happens when we step outside of our comfort zones and embrace new experiences, even if they're a little scary.
Mm-hmm.
It's that same adventurous spirit they talked about earlier, the willingness to question the status quo and explore unconventional paths.
Right. And this leads them to encourage listeners to pursue their passions regardless of societal expectations or financial rewards. It's about finding what truly lights you up and going for it, even if it doesn't fit into the traditional mold of success.
It's a message of authenticity, of living a life that's true to yourself, not just what others expect of you.
Right.
But they're also realistic. They acknowledge that any journey of personal growth will have its challenges and setbacks.
Yeah, they share personal stories about times they've faced adversity, made mistakes, and learned from those experiences. And they emphasize the importance of resilience, perseverance, and maintaining a positive outlook even when things get tough.
Right. It's a reminder that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's a stepping stone.
Mm-hmm.
It's about getting back up, learning from those experiences, and using them to fuel your growth.
And they remind us to not take ourselves too seriously, to find the humor in life's absurdities. Throughout the conversation, you can hear them laughing, joking, and finding moments of levity, even amidst some pretty heavy topics.
Right. A good reminder that joy and laughter are essential parts of a well-lived life.
Absolutely.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the potential dangers of unchecked power and profit to the importance of individual growth, community, and connection.
It's been a roller coaster ride.
It has.
But what stands out to you as the most impactful takeaway from this conversation?
For me, it's that sense of agency they emphasize. It's that message of questioning everything, thinking critically, and taking responsibility for shaping a better world. They remind us that we're not just passive recipients of whatever those empowered decide. We have a voice, we have choices, and we can make a difference.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. It's a call to action, an invitation to step into our power and create a world that prioritizes people, compassion, and connection over profit and control. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deeper.